Good morning, everyone. Maayong hapon sa ato ang tanan. So as mentioned by Chantal, I'm Juan from UNDP. I'm the Social Innovation Analyst under the Accelerator Labs, where we really try to ignite change in terms of localizing the SDGs. So I think the topic that we have now is on agriculture and specifically on finance. I think it's interesting to know what the financing mechanisms are currently, especially in light of what has happened, globally. Due to the pandemic, we see that our supply chains are very unstable, and there is a real need to make do or at least push for an own indigenous source of food. So without further ado, I welcome Gaps and Priya to the seats here. Oh, Shim. Sorry, I'm used to meeting Gaps. So I apologize for that. Okay. So Shim and Priya, welcome. So before we start, take your seat. Maybe okay. I'll pick the seat here, and then so I think it's a very intimate session here. We were supposed to have four speakers, but I think this is just a two-on-one conversation. So I would want to know more about you guys. So maybe Priya first, and then Shim.
Sure. Thanks so much. Great to be here. And I hope everyone's had a wonderful 2 days. My name is Priya Tachadi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of an organization called Will Grow Philippines. And we are one would describe as an impact incubator, which means nothing but we believe in the power of entrepreneurship to solve urgent social and environmental issues, and to kind of back up that belief, we support entrepreneurs, both urban and rural entrepreneurs, who are addressing these urgent issues, because we believe that change is possible when people all around, no matter what their background, can contribute equitably to it. And so we're trying to find ways to support that. Over to you, Shim, who also doing very beautiful, similar things.
Thank you, Priya. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, my buntag sa atong tanan. My name is Shim, and I am from Mindanao. I'm a Bangsamoro. I have a mix of blood. The Bangsamoro is composed of 13 groups of people. So it's not just Maguindanao and Iranum Maranao, but 13 groups of people. And before we found that we have lots of programs and very good government funding to a lot of the things. However, poverty incidence in the Bangsamoro region is still very high. So we've been asking about why is it still very difficult for us to move up from that situations. And I think one of the areas where we found is that because we lack a lot of our processes do not involve the people at the center of all of this. So that's why we put up the organization, the Moropreneur Incorporated, which allowed the people to understand the context and formulate solutions to the problem that they're facing. So it's a people-led, co-creating, innovative solution organization. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So I guess it's just really to highlight the importance of inclusive innovations, and also especially making do with participatory governance. We want to make sure that the initiatives led on the ground are actually led by the people, and the benefit ultimately redounds on them. So we will be dividing this session into themes. So let me go through the themes. First is we will be going through an overview of financial tools present. The next theme would be balancing short-term and long-term needs. The third would be redefining value and return. And the fourth would be recommendations from a policy-making standpoint. So let's get right to it then. Sure. Okay. So the first question for, you could just share the microphone if someone else wants to answer. So, so the first question would be, what financial tools are tools are present to finance SDG-driven investments in agriculture? How might these tools be accessed? Who are the primary lenders, investing bodies, and how might these tools or mechanisms be made more accessible for stakeholders seeking additional funding? It might be super
I feel
technical,
like
but
Shim has the list of everything
Yeah.
that you need to know, but I'll just get started. I think we can't talk about financing until we all acknowledge that farmer bankruptcies and debts is the misery that is in our societies and communities in our countries, right? I'm from India. It's a similar story here in the Philippines, that we've seen. So the tools that are needed is anything that does not propagate and exacerbate that. I think that's the first point that we have to acknowledge. But unfortunately, the systems that we have predominantly today, the instruments that we have predominantly today, continue to get farmers stuck in that poverty trap. So where do we go from there is really the question, because there are a whole lot of loans, financial products, especially focused on the agri sector, which in many emerging economies is the priority sector, right? I don't think you can find a government anywhere in South and Southeast Asia that is not saying that agriculture is a priority sector. But when we continue to look at how farmers' lives or well-being has improved, it doesn't really match up. So to answer the question, yes, there is financing, and there's a lot of it, of course, starting from the large institutional banks, where in this country, actually, we have a rule that says that there should be priority lending for agriculture. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Most banks actually pay the fines for not doing that priority lending or meeting those targets. We, of course, have then the small financing, right? Microfinancing. And then we have the informal lending segment, which is even bigger, which has traditionally, or at least over the last few decades, played a huge role. But we have to ask why it has played a huge role. It has played a huge role in farmer debt and farmer bankruptcies because the cost of inputs has been driven so high. Because we have been pushing for an agriculture that is dependent on fossil fuels, that is dependent on buying the most expensive and better fertilizers that has been kind of mandated, more expensive seeds, and which means the pressure is on the farmer to find the financing, and then they have to go where is whatever is accessible, and very often what is accessible is not fair, is expensive, and that continues to propagate the poverty traps. So talking about financing, I think it's really hard to talk about without the core issues of agriculture and the industrialized agriculture that is predominantly being pushed. So I have to just say, before I pass it to Shim, is that, honestly, being here over the last 2 days has given me many life epiphanies. I was just telling Shim this morning. And really it is that a lot of the conversation has been around, going from farm to market, training the farmers. How do we also fund and finance that? But the first thing that we have to address is that there is a broken food system, right? There's a broken agricultural system. And we are all propagating it in some ways because the system is set up that way. So for us to make financing inclusive, there needs to be a holistic approach of how we are actually changing, fundamentally changing to what this conference is about, a sustainable and inclusive agri-economy. That means there's only one way forward, is that this needs to be regenerative agriculture, respecting our indigenous knowledge, respecting the food systems that we were all dependent on, and then actually creating financial products that can. So today, as an investor myself, we do invest in agri-entrepreneurs. And so we're really looking for entrepreneurs who, and the indicator for us is who are improving the well-being of farmers, right? Yes, farmer income, but also the well-being, improving biodiversity, improving soil, improving the water table. And so the instruments that we need are actually in that lens. I've maybe gone a little bit off topic, so I'm going to pass it to Shim to bring us back.
Thank you, Priya. That's a comprehensive discussion already. But before Well, definitely to answer your questions directly, we do have laws and policies. We have international treaties and covenant that talks and provides directions to countries. But before going deep into that, I think it's also important to ask why we need to understand and how is the financial sector is helping the agri and how do we localize the sustainable development goals. I think it's important to have an inclusive and better designed finance system because essentially agriculture for it to function its full function to address poverty, to contribute into the economic development and growth, as well as food security, it must really have access to finances nowadays. And there are a lot of, and just resonating to what Pia said, studies is saying that 40 years from now, we may be needing around 60% of agriculture, an increase of our production in agriculture because of the kind of lifestyle that we have, the world population growth rate, and a lot of things. So it's important. And also the risk that we are seeing right now, the different, the weather in all of these. So I think it's important that at this point, we have a better understanding on how finances can actually affect and contribute to the improvement of the agriculture society.
Thanks, Jim. So I think just to touch on that point also, from a multilateral institution side, financing when it comes to sustainable development has moved, has had a shift, right? There's this term called domestic resource mobilization. So most actually of what financing is being done actually comes from countries themselves. Usually previously it came from in the form of ODA and all those other development assistance, but now the focus is really to push for a more indigenous source of financing. So that really needs to come from private sectors, the public sector, even governments need to fund their own agricultural sector. So in line with that, how's the current situation in the Philippines in terms of private finance and also public financing for the agricultural sector?
Okay, I think for medium and large enterprises, they may be having no challenges in terms of accessing financial products. But when we talk about the smallholder farmers, that's where actually we have lots of difficulties. For example, some of the regulatory frameworks are still discriminatory to women. A lot of the women, and this is based on the studies that we've conducted. One is a study we've conducted on the informalities of agri enterprises in the Bangsamoro areas, for example, is that women cannot access formal financial loans because the bank requires first collaterals, and a lot of the smallholder farmers do not have collaterals. Second is that they require male or the head of the family to be the owner of the property rights. So there's a need to review policies that that surrounds property rights also, that it should also provide protection to the women and be given the opportunity to have a name on their titles. So we have lots of
built around this, right? So now for us to transition away from that, I believe is necessary. And one of the reasons is if Asian wealth will unlock itself. And today that is not really happening. And that's why, so even if you look at even more sophisticated sectors like impact investing, right, which is far away from where smallholder farmers are, majority of, the funders behind that come from the West, right? Maybe a little bit from Japan, more and more now. But so that is the situation that we are today. So how do we change that? And that means that philanthropy that is Asian driven needs to change, right? And I do believe that it's happening slowly, but maybe slower than what most of us would like to see, those of us who are working on the ground. But I think that is a shift that needs to happen. Now, what is going to drive that? Maybe it is the next generation of, wealth owners who are, younger millennials who are maybe more connected. I don't know. I think it is yet to be proven. But I think the fact that if you look at even the foundations in the Philippines, we are starting to see some of those, right? We are seeing the next generation sort of wealth getting involved. So maybe we'll see that. Are we close to it? We were discussing this. It's we're quite far away. But in terms of, going back to Shim's point, is that there is an extractive nature in which agriculture is being practiced today. And that is the fundamental issue of financing. It's the fundamental issue of poverty and hunger, right? If, going back to what Shim was saying, a very powerful point is that we need far more food, right? Because why? Because of the way that we are eating today. If we were eating like our ancestors, where we were growing what we eat and eating what we grow, that would not be the case. We have been driven towards an economy, a food system that has been defined by, large multinational corporations that have said that we must do monoculture, like one crop. No, our ancestors did not practice monocultures, right? Our ancestors knew what was good for the earth and grew multiple crops and allowed biodiversity to grow. And we ate that. And 70% of diseases today can be traced back to what we put into our body. And that is driven by a system that all of us obviously have embraced and are part of. So I think a lot of this is very fundamental change that is needed in the way that agriculture systems have been. And I think, the people at this conference and the conversations that we have today is really talking about acknowledging the knowledge and the wealth of our ancestors and, appreciating traditional ways. But we have to obviously work within the market. So how do we do that? And for that, yes, we do need to be less dependent on, the foreign money or the aid money. But it's going to take us time. So really consistent, amazing groundwork like what Shim and others in Bangsamoro are doing, that is what we have to support and back so that we can actually transition away to solutions that are Asian, that is coming from our cultures and our systems. It's going to take, I think, a generation of young people being empowered. And I think that's what this election has shown us, that, young people, once they are driven, I think is, and if we can really mobilize through conversations like this, taking back our own, appreciating our cultures and taking back our own systems, I think that's the first step towards what you are saying.
Thank you for that. Maybe Shim, you want to add more?
No, I just want to add into that some of the practices that are proven to be very, very good. For example, we're missing the opportunity to have the Islamic financing in banking in the country. Fortunately, we have enacted the law right now on Islamic banking, but we haven't really defined it yet for the people to access it. The Islamic finance is a really, really good mechanism. It's empowering. It's not based on interest. So it's not actually giving interest. It has lots of prohibitions, like you cannot use money coming from the gambles or from the bad faith, something like that. But it's empowering because there is profit sharing and loss. The treatment of the bank to the customer is not like a customer, but a partner. So you share the profit as well as the loss also. So, but there are a lot of things that we can review. We can audit some of the practices that we feel are very applicable at this point in time.
Thanks for that. So just to touch up on the things that you've mentioned, I think there's a real need to move away from, extractive food systems and move towards a system where, there's real ownership, not only understanding that the problem is directed at the farmers, but it is actually also our own problem, right? Since there's growing need for food and, necessary resources for us. So touching on that, I would want to move on the next theme. So this is on balancing short-term and long-term needs. So how might investors and investment-seeking bodies, actors balance the need for short-term results vis-a-vis the long-term nature of the ROIs provided by community and/or agriculture-based enterprises? It's quite a lengthy question, no? But I think it's just really, it really just boils down to how do we entice younger people to invest in agriculture with the understanding that the returns might be long term? And going away from the short term mindset, when we invest, that's, I think, one of the reasons why it's extractive, because the nature of, you put your money in, you want your money to gain a considerable amount afterwards. So I think there's that the extractive nature comes from there. There's that need to really get a lot of money in the short term. So how do we entice younger people, investors, to actually put up money and wait it out for the long term results?
Sure. It's a tricky tricky question.
Yeah.
But I think first, to your point, let's address the fact that instant gratification is the theme of of this decade. And it is not something that has emerged suddenly only because of social media. For decades now, there has been a profit-only mindset that has driven us to a consumeristic economy. That has, sown the seeds of this instant gratification, right? And I think investing, financing, has of course reflected the type of values that we have been creating in this world. So I think the practical way to think about it is that there will be investors, there will be funding institutions that are focused on short-term and results or returns without caring for the planet. They will exist. They will continue to exist until the end of our lives, maybe our children's lives, our grandchildren's lives. That's going to happen. Now the question is, how do we grow the breed of investors, financiers who actually genuinely care and want to invest in the long-term results? Because why? Because that is the only path if we want to continue to live on this planet and if we want to save the only home that we have, right? And a lot of it comes back to agriculture and what we are doing to our food systems. So when, if you're taking the context of agri-entrepreneurs who are looking for funding, which I think is, part of your question, you need to find aligned investors with the values that you have. Yes, they might be small, but they do exist, right? They are a growing breed, and we'll also talk about, how do we really grow that? But so there is. So I think like aligning yourselves with people who resonate with your values. So if you want to work with smallholder farmers, you want to grow biodiversity, you want to improve yield, but which is actually growing or improving the well-being of the farmers, then you have to take money from the people who also care about that, right? Which means it is much harder to find them. It'll take a bit longer. You probably are not in the networks that, that actually can reach you to that people. That's what we have to change. And as ecosystem builders, that's what we are trying to change is that, who are these people? How do we make them visible? How do we connect them to the entrepreneurs? So I think that is one strategy as ecosystem builders, especially those advocating for entrepreneurship as a part of the solution. That's what we have to do, because that's the only way that we can actually bring inclusivity and really kind of talk about sustainable, inclusive agriculture. On the second part is how do we grow the breed? I think first we need some role models, right? I think so. For me, it is really about doing this myself. So I woke up this morning at 5 a.m. having this epiphany of like, am I actually propagating the same things that, I shouldn't be, right? Am I investing in entrepreneurs who are actually caring not just about high yield and getting the produce to market, but actually yield means, and I think you have a question later on metrics, so I'll talk about this, but yield means other things other than just the quantity of what you're putting in the truck, right? So those are the ways that you can. So I think we definitely need more role models. We need to celebrate the stories and successes and failures of trying to do it this way, trying to do it right. I know that it's not going to be easy, but there are enough number of people who are trying to do it, right? And thanks for having us on the panel. This is one way where we can talk about it. But I think we need to grow that breed. And I think young people today, I don't know if they've started investing yet because of all the cultural things that we're talking about. But I think it is a call to action. We need a movement that is driven by conscious young people for whom this planet is running out of time. Yeah, maybe I will live and die, but then, the next generation is going to be left with a planet which is unlivable. So young people today, this is your life, this is your children's life. So we have an opportunity to challenge these systems that have been set up in, sorry to use this word, but with colonial structures and mindsets. We, especially as the Asian youth, we have to rise up, we have to build systems. And I think investing and supporting smallholder farmers, supporting entrepreneurs who are working on the ground is a fantastic way to do that. Is there enough knowledge and training of how to do it? I think those are things that, those of us who are working in the ecosystem are trying to do. We're all part of small movements, but I'm sure, connecting and talking about it is there. But there is an investment opportunity to support our farmers, not only to get those products to market, but actually caring about the soil, caring about improving water tables, caring ultimately about the farmers' well-being.
Well, in addition to what Priya already stated, first is on the mindset. I think investors and everyone should have a mindset that when you work with a community, you're talking about long-term approach, that it requires patience, time, resources, and we need to build and nurture the community. But the return, once the community has been nurtured and it has been built, the return is not just clear, but it's long-lasting. And the impact is also multiple. It's varying. So it can hit a lot of the sustainable development goals because of that. But another area is on the policy level. Perhaps the government can provide a clear policy directions in terms of responsible business conduct. Promoting the good side of a business, for example, promoting the social-economic impact of businesses and providing incentives to those investors and companies that recognize the efforts of investors that are working in supporting social-economic benefits of the investment rather than thinking about a faster ROI on that matter. So I think we can be very creative on that matter also.
Thanks for that. Those are wonderful insights. Actually, we touched on the third theme. So it's actually redefining value and return. So you already mentioned that we need to shift away from that sort of extractive mentality and to push for more long-term sustainable solutions towards agriculture, especially in light of what is happening around the world. So now, I guess this is just a reflection, right? In terms of being at the situation of the farmers, what do you think the needs are in terms of capacity building, in terms of in terms of the day-to-day problems that they're facing? Since we're a bit privileged to be sitting here and talking about them, but it's one thing to also see their perspective and to really understand more.
To really answer that question, I think there's a need for development workers as well as even financing institutions to have an empathy journey of the lives of the farmers and the smallholder fisher folks and even the informal sectors. We need to understand the situation, the pain points, their aspirations also, for us to determine which areas that they'll be needing support. In mindset is number one. While there are a lot of traditional practices that are good, but there are also lots of harmful practices that are innate already because it has been passed through generations. And that is something that we need to tackle and provide them the opportunity to understand better that what they're doing is destructive to the environment, to the entire ecosystem. So we need to really provide more advocacy works on that matter. We have to provide them probably based on experience also, because we've been doing profiling of our farmers. Clean and efficient energy is an area which they have a very limited understanding, and I think Priya can expound on this, but we've seen it that the input is very high, but the output is very small. The return is very small, and it's because the technology that they're using is not really that efficient. So having a clean and efficient and energy efficient technology would really help them. Financial management is one. A lot of our farmers are living in a subsistence income, meaning to say every income that they have, they just buy it for the basic needs. There's no savings, no thinking about the future. So they're spending it on the daily requirements. And that's because of the situations they're facing also. Entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial capacity of our farmers is also low. It's different. They just sell it, but a lot of the entrepreneurial mindset and the growth mindset part of it is not really integrated into their system. So they need to be part of that. What else? And probably for the government to provide clear educations about the existing policies and laws that could affect their daily lives. One of the major findings that we've seen is that a lot of people doesn't really understand the existing laws and policies. And these are affecting the daily lives of our farmers, for example. And in that area, I think we need to work on that more, providing more accurate information. And of course, the public infra that is super needed, power, electric, without a good everything, connectivity, and all of those. If we cannot really provide that support to them, then we're still in this situation. I'm not sure about it.
10 years later, we'll be at this conference saying the same thing, right? Yeah, I think Shims put it beautifully, but since I woke up in this very combative mood, I'm sorry, Juan. You know, the system has put them at this point where we have to capacitate, right? I mean, we have shut or cut farmers down to this level because of the nature of the consumerist economy that has been propagated by, a lot of us. And so that's why they need the capacity building, because they have been cut off from the way that market systems have been set up. And hence, now when they could have actually lived on subsistence living, now today they cannot because the cost of living is so high, right? Access to basics is so difficult. So number one is that we have to acknowledge that the system has put them in this vulnerable position where actually they need this capacity building or whatever that we're calling it, right? I think what the work that Shim and what kind of described is really trying to, that trickle down economics that never trickled down. That's what we are trying to course correct through some of these initiatives and what's needed, whether it's in, financial management, whether it is, training of marketing better or producing better, whatever that might be. It's because the market systems that we've developed over the last 30, 40 years have not worked, right? It has just made farmers poorer. They've made them hungrier. And we now have, for example, in my country, more than 500,000 farmers have killed themselves, right? Because they feel stuck. I read this morning a very dubious, in my mind dubious, an article where the Philippine Statistic Authority was saying that we need to start focusing on farmer mental health. I wonder what is the statistic behind that for them to make that. But that is an urgent social cry. That means there are stories, there are statistics that probably we are not seeing. Right. And so we've actually done this because of the agricultural system that we have all been part of. We've actually put them there. So in terms, when we talk about capacity building, when we talk about this, we really need to make sure that this is inclusive, that we are being respectful of where they come from, as Shim was saying, understanding kind of their indigenous way of life. And actually and I think we have to stop saying the empowering of farmers, right? They don't need to be empowered. They have enough power. It's just that the system that we've created, there is a big gap, right? So it's not about empowerment. It's really about being inclusive. It's really about how do we then really work with the system that we have, which is deeply, unequal, but bridging the gap and trying to bring them. But I think we will be wrong if we pursue it continuously in this profit-driven mindset only. Yes, profit is important, and I'm a believer in that. I'm an investor. I back businesses. But if we don't make sure that whatever we are trying to kind of, support, and if it's not inclusive, if it's not respectful of the earth, if we are not making sure that actually in part of those policies and things should also be talking about how are we restoring the soil, right? How are we improving the water table? A lot of the training and capacity building, I think that, is in place and is predominant is really like, okay, the problem is really getting the produce to market. And so and then, improving yield, which is only measured in terms of quantity, which is, what is the kilos, not in terms of nutritional value, not in terms of, soil fertility, not in terms of improving water, not in terms of improving farmer well-being. So we need to make sure that, we are being holistic in the approach of this capacity building, because otherwise everything will be only in the short term. 10 years later, there will be no lands to farm, right? And everyone is going to be hungrier. And still giving trainings.
Thank you. And also, just to touch on capacity building, I think the farmers would also have a great, a wide array of resources in terms of traditional knowledge that that other farmers might not even know of. So probably we could, another aspect of capacity building is internal capacity building within farmers, right? And also, enrichment. So, touching on that, this is another maybe heavy question, since this is really focused more, the next question is focused more on policy. So what might the policy recommendations be then in terms of, aligning with the needs of the farmers and bridging that gap of their needs and also the needs of the people?
Okay. There are a lot of topics to discuss when it comes to policy that requires a national discussions about that. But so I remember there are a lot of discussions in our region about this. Currently, we're doing the agri code as well as the investment code in the Bangsamoro. So it's good that we're touched. Well, this one is very relevant to that discussion. So a lot of things, for example, there should be, in terms of the investment policy, for example, it has to be open, transparent, and meaningful to both to the investors as well as to the farmers. That the kind of the investment should not shortchange our farmers. It has to be empowering to them. The investment promotion and facilitation of the investment must also provide incentives to them, the investors, on that, as well as to farmers who are able to do it. And so in a lot of areas, trade policy, for example, farmers are having difficulties in transporting their products because of regulatory frameworks. So that must be clarified, and you have to allow it to be more transparent so that both the investors and the farmers understand very well how to go about it. The financing, I think on the finances, the finance development, in the BARM context, there is a need to really develop the Islamic microfinance as an approach. So currently, the BARM is developing the Islamic microfinance code also. They're formulating that. So we're still in that area. So I cannot really speak much about it because I might be. So there is in that area. Human resource research and development is also an area that we need to really focus on. We need to have a strong human capital, at the same time, a working agricultural system. These two things are very important, that they need to work together. It could really attract a lot of investors. At the same time, it could also strengthen the capacity of our farmers and the entire system. You need to look into the tax policy also. There's a need to discuss about the tax, when and where and how to put some incentives and relax into that. Yes. So these are some areas that, and a lot of things that comes into my mind, but yeah, I might be allowing Priya to discuss.
Yeah, I think Shim's laid it out for us, everything that needs to happen, and there's probably more. But I'll take a slightly different view in the sense that, honestly speaking, the number one thing is just ease of doing business. Today, as a small entrepreneur or running a small corporate, if you have to go and stand in line for half a day to have to file basic returns or get some basic documentation when you get moved from one department to the other. Like many times, I think like when we have been working with cooperatives or, organized groups in Bangsamoro, for example, they're waiting for this piece of paper from here and there, right? So number one, I think more than any big innovative policy mechanisms, improving ease of doing business needs to be the priority for any government anywhere. But I think especially in the Philippines, where still a lot of things are highly bureaucratic, the amount of time and resources that small organizations have to spend on just navigating the system, if you have to put a value to it, it'll be like in the billions of dollars, right? But that is the reality. And I think that is because we are transitioning into a more digital space and it will take time. So I think acceleration of that, of course, transparency around that, I think is what we need. In terms of incentivizing, I think if it's around sort of policy around improving sort of the investment landscape and things like that, at a high level, at the national, when you look at investing in the Philippines, it's still very difficult to put money in and take money in and out. And so what a lot of entrepreneurs end up having to do is set up companies. Those who are more privileged and, are savvier and have the exposure will set up a company also in Singapore, right? And then that will become easier. So those are some longer term views. I think the Banco Central has been very progressive when it comes to digital financing. So I think we have to be appreciative. They've really kind of, over the last 2 years in the pandemic, we saw that an enabling framework was really created. I think the first licenses of digital banks have been there. So it's it's become easier. I think the way that GCash has changed our lives has made it much easier for us to move money around. Those are, I think, all positives in the ecosystem. But if we come back to still, the fact that we have laws in place, but still agricultural lending does not happen. Still today, as Shim said, like it's difficult for anyone to go to a bank and actually have all of the paperwork that is needed to actually get a loan or, get the financial product, or even like the lack of Islamic financing. I think the number of the hours that we have spent on trying to kind of see how we can bring financing to the groups in the BAM region, but with the absence of Islamic financing, it's just not possible. Like no point brainstorming about anything else. Like that is the simplest thing that is needed. So I think there are there is sort of the grassroots pieces that Shim spoke about, but I think institutionally as a governance mechanism, improving transparency in governance, making sure ease of doing business is much simpler for small entrepreneurs, right? If you are a solo entrepreneur today, my God, like just filing the tax season, like you really want to like just say that this is enough, like no need to do this anymore, right? So how can we really improve that? I think that's from a perspective. I think yesterday Nelvin mentioned a very important point, right? There is a lot of thought around, especially in the agriculture space, setting up, facilities. And so that's fantastic. Shared facilities, I think, is a fantastic way. But I think she was saying yesterday, there's like one facility in all of sort of Mindanao, right? Like that, those kind of things need to change. So being strategic, I think in mapping sort of the needs of, if we are saying that value added agricultural products is going to improve the incomes of farmers, then making sure the whatever system that we're building, infrastructure we're building, actually is mapped to the demand in the market, is inclusive, is not propagating the extractive agriculture. These are all things that actually will take political will, and championing those on the ground who are actually doing this work.
Thank you. That was quite lengthy, but very substantive. No, it's very interesting to really see that the answers to what policy needs we have.
We have to fill the time of the other two panelists as well, right?
That's true. But we already have a lot of answers also. But how come, this is probably just a question, a meandering of some sorts. We already know these problems exist, right? But how come policies aren't still not enforced, or there is a slow uptick on innovating on newer policies? Would there be a disconnect in having, would we say that there is less of a voice for the farmers, or would there also be a need to consolidate them into having a bigger voice, having these coalitions, having to push for a more active participation in their own, clamor for their needs as well.
Shim, as a foreigner, it's very difficult for me to answer this. So go ahead.
No, I think there is a gap or a disconnect when we design policies. These are very good laws and policies, but the implementation is very bad. Why? Because I think we design policies to regulate rather than really putting its very essence, which is to address and ease up the situation, to address the problem and ease up the situations. So we try to be more regulative and try to restrict a lot of things, thinking that that will solve the problem. And that's why people are not really relying or submitting themselves in following those policies. Plus the mere fact that it's not being discussed or people are not well informed about it. So they just design it here at the upper level. They get data from the ground, they design it at the upper level, and they implement it, and that's it. And it doesn't work like that way. It has to be a mutual discussions between the government and the people for the people to subscribe to it and understand the consequences of not doing it and while doing it also. So there's a better way to do it. Dialogue must be part. In our parlance, we call it the mashwara. It's a participatory base. An example of this one is in the local government code. There is already the participatory budgeting approach, but the people are not really part of that. The local government is not really allowing the people to participate in the design of the budget. And civil societies are even legally part of that. But again, I haven't seen local government unit that really empower the people to say that these are the things that we need. So you have to provide funding into this area. So I think that's one, that the essence of the policies itself. And then we are really poor in terms of monitoring and evaluation. 4Ps, for example, the government just provide a program, but they're not really doing the monitoring and evaluation effectively. They're not learning that a lot of the funding are not really going to the houses, to the intended indigent populations, but these are going to the corrupt and crook officials who are meddling into that's a very small amount of money, and yet they still capitalize on that. So the monitoring and evaluation is very poor, and there is no post implementation assessment of all of these policies. And we keep on doing a lot of, I think we are so distracted with a lot of things that's going on that we keep on, and to address this is to put more medicines, put more policies into it, that we've really lost the very essence of the problem and the formula that we have. It has to be actually very simple, and yet we actually complicate things by doing more policies into this. It's a rant. Is that a rant?
Yeah.
I think like every word of that we should actually hang on to, because that, I think she made a very important point of adding new things when we actually probably need to fix and monitor, and I would say build transparency in a lot of the things that we're already there, right? So if you look at, I mean, for example, I think, to give kudos to what really happened through the pandemic, the Department of Agriculture really mobilized when, everything's kind of stopped. There was, when Dr. Dar was there was that kind of push to somehow make it, make the whole country run. And the focus on sort of agri and food systems was really kind of there. So I think, there are, as Shim pointed out, many schemes and policies that are there for the benefit. Now, like in many of our emerging countries, economies and the governments that we have, like there is a problem in kind of translating that to action, and there is a lot of leakage, right? Like the money may not actually reach the beneficiaries. And I think building sort of transparency and maybe even digitizing a lot of that process will actually kind of help. But it's a systemic issue that I think we have to just keep fighting, right? Like you have to keep fighting the good fight to make that happen. But I want to talk about the other piece of your question, which is about the collective voice. And I was thinking twice whether I actually even say it, because, people in my country are being jailed for even thinking it. But if you watched, if you saw any of the news, you saw that farmers in India agitated and sat in the freezing cold winters of Delhi month after month, even when they were being water cannoned, to raise up their voices. And similar movements are happening all around around this country. It's happening everywhere, right? And it is a symptom of the inefficiencies in the system that we built, and the kind of promotion of this sort of profit-only approach and this extractive nature that continues to grow. So despite all of the good that's happening, we are fighting against a deep-rooted, system of agriculture that has been very top-down, like what Shim said. And a lot of our policies and things have also been created that continue to kind of perpetuate it. So what we really need is an overhaul of building this inclusive agricultural system. And it starts with, continuing to lift up the voices of farmers. And representatives like Shim, who are seeing this on the ground, are here talking about it because it's not possible to have, a group of farmers here, right? So I think it's important for us to kind of raise up indigenous voices who actually can speak on behalf. But the power of the collective voice of farmers, that is a sound that, that is deafening, and that is a sound that you cannot ignore. Right. And so anytime anything is being drafted, whether it's a policy, whether it's, businesses who are trying to, drive a certain agenda, whether it's seed companies continuing to indebt farmers, I think that we will never be able to shut out the voices of farmers because they feed us. They are, closest to nature. They are the drivers of and keepers of the land, right? So I think what we really need is continuing to be respectful and stop the mindset of empowering farmers. They are powerful enough wherever they are, however small their land is, but continuing to bridge the gap, as Shim said. So how do we do that? I think a lot of things have been discussed in the last 2 days, and it has to be holistic, right? We can't only solve financing, or we can't only solve putting a machine there to make some value added product and like just increasing that. It has to be a holistic system. But fundamentally, there is a problem in the way that we built the agricultural system. So all of us, I think, as individuals, whether you're at the top of your organization or as an individual, the way our relationship with food, that's where it starts, right? What we put in our body, that's where it starts. And I think all of that, when that's collective, that is a sound that will not be ignored.
Thanks for that. That's very a good reflection on what we really need. So just touching up on Shim's point, I would like to talk about this regulatory nature of how we do policies. Since this usually in turn becomes, we only react to the needs of the people. We don't anticipate, and listening to, the reflections that we've had here, the insights, I think we need to do a shift towards a more anticipative nature in terms of policymaking, in terms of looking at the needs of the people. Since, we could already foresee probably what the problems are 5 years from now. If we see at the current problems that we're facing. So I think there's the need to not only anticipate in terms of policy, but also to tackle the things that we have the current problems that we have right now, so we can push for and understand, okay, these are the solutions now. How can we tweak them to fit future problems? So I think, yeah.
I think I'll add on that one of the missing mechanism is a risk mitigation plan. A lot of the business plans do not have a risk mitigation, which we should be doing right now, because like in agriculture, the common enemies are weather, the prices, and all of this, even conflict and disasters. And without having a plan that could counter or at least mitigate the impact of this, then we will be having worse situation in the future. So there are mechanisms like that can be one of those. Do you have other?
I should think I think we kind of discussed quite a lot of like those opportunities, right? Like maybe I'll kind of share like a different perspective. I think it is not about tweaking solutions. We have a fundamental problem that this is an agriculture is meant to be care for the earth, right? That's what the word actually means, care for the land. And our system today is extractive, as we discussed in detail. What we need is a transition from extractive agriculture to regenerative agriculture. We can't keep taking and not giving back. And the truth is that smallholder farmers and indigenous farmers actually practice that. They don't keep taking, right? They actually continue to regenerate the soil, the earth, the land around them. So what we need is really, I would say, a transition. We have to reject this, that we need a transition from extractive agriculture to regenerative, organic, whatever you might want to call it, right? And that's what we need. And so how do we make that the majority of the agricultural system? I think that is the question before all of us, right? How do we can keep tweaking the solutions in this extractive agri-economy, but in the long term, we are not going to get anywhere. We are still going to keep our farmers trapped in poverty. We are still going to continue to have health issues. We are still going to have, feel powerless in the, in the system. We can, do as many capacity building trainings as we want, but that's not going to change anything fundamentally. So what we need is a transition, and what we need is a very active plan. I think there's a lot of conversation about net zero and all of that. But if you look at all of the SDGs, every single SDG actually is about agriculture, right? We can't achieve any of those without having a sustainable, inclusive, regenerative agricultural system. So what we need is specific, how do we as a system really transition to where tomorrow all agriculture is, regenerative agriculture. But it's not so easy as saying these, powerful words, because we are facing a highly profitable agricultural system that works for, corporations. It's working for many, many people in the world, right? It's changed how we eat, what we put in our body. So it's really it's the Mount Everest to make that transition. But all around this country, it's happening, right? Farmers are tired of using fertilizers. They can see what is being done to their soil. There is a very painful, often, the first few years of moving to organic agriculture means that you have very little earnings because, the land really needs to regenerate, right? But these movements are happening all around this country. And what we need to do is support that. And that's where we need to divert our resources to, and we have to help raise up those voices.
I'll have one area, for example, is to move from looking at producing cheaper food and realizing the true costs. Cheaper food is actually very pricey. For example, the fast foods, sorry for that, but it's actually very pricey to the health of the people. And because you need to integrate also the cost of degenerating the environment, destroying and everything, all of that. When you try to look into all of these true costs, then you would say that it's not really better to do this cheap food, something like that, to that effect.
Okay. I was thinking of getting McDonald's later, but I'll say no now.
Or it's because our eating habits have changed.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's also a good discussion on changing diets. I recently went to a meeting with some people from Estonia, and they actually tried to study, in terms of land access and land use, how much smaller it would be if the people from the cities would change their diets to a more, focused more on less meat, more plants. So,
yes,
yeah, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Oh my God, it's my whole other kind of life. I became a vegetarian when I was 8 years old. Because I saw kind of mass killing in a factory, right? And that is, and now it's a trend, plant-based diet. But primarily of the conversation around plant-based diet is lab-made plant-based. But in fact, in Asian cultures, we have been plant-based forever, right? What has overtaken our lives is really all of the stuff that Shim was talking about, the cheaper food, the faster food. But our traditions, if you look at our cultures, it is primarily plant-based because we eat what was growing in our lands, and what is in our waters, and so that's really what has changed. So I think yes, this is not the venue to like advocate for vegetarian or veganism, but that also has created a problem of like, only buying what is created in a lab, and that's out of reach for most people. We just need to eat what our ancestors were eating, and honestly, we'll be fine.
Yeah, there is definitely value in changing diets, but I think that's a very big thing to push for in terms of policy. So moving forward to the next part of the program, we'll go now to the question and answers. So maybe some of the people from the room here would want to ask our panelists some questions.
Maybe we answered too much already.
Or okay,
Yes.
yeah, we could yeah, go ahead. Yes, please, sir, with the black glasses. Yeah, pwede kayong mag-Tagalog ah. Yes, please.
Hi, so I have two questions. One is related to the regenerative agriculture that you mentioned. Do you think that the regenerative agriculture or any types of other sustainable agricultural practices are being pushed towards the big corporations, or the current situation is actually pushing the farmers, but not like the big corporations for that? But I think of sustainable agriculture in general, probably in the bigger plantations, they are being pushed. But then I think regenerative agriculture probably is mostly on the farmers, but like big corporations, how is the progress for that? Second question is related to the financing access. How well do you think the financial literacy within the smallholder farmers related to this agricultural investment? Because when it comes to investment, it also carries risk and everything, right? And if the farmers do not really have strong financial literacy, then we may trap them into this kind of debt cycle and everything. So yeah, that's.
Can you also tell us a little bit about you?
Oh, I'm Dimas Ozi from Stockholm Environment Institute. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'll take the first one, and then you can talk about farmer literacy. You are absolutely right, sir. I think the global agricultural system is driven by large corporations pushing farmers to grow one crop, right? Monoculture is a poverty breeding system. That's what it is. Because then, and as you rightly pointed out, it is as far away from regenerative agriculture as possible, because it is about putting the inputs that give you the highest yield in terms of volume, right? In terms of weight. So when we talk today about agriculture, and over the last 2 days, I heard like this high yield, as like a really key word, right? Because that's what we're really pushing our farmers to do. But what is, high yield today is only about the quantity that you can produce. What is the weight that we can put into trucks? Like no one is going to come and collect from you actually if you don't produce X kilos, right? That is the reality of what we are doing today. Yield should be about, yes, what is the quantity that you're producing, but what is happening to the soil, right? How well is the soil doing? How well is the water table doing? How well is the farmer doing, right? That is what yield needs to be. And that is not the definition, because we are as far away from regenerative agriculture as possible, driven exactly by what you were saying, which is, large monoculture systems, right? I have to share my own example. My parents are also farmers, but they are larger farmers, and we've had a plantation of a cash crop for a long time. And over the last 2 years, we've actually stopped planting, because I was like, this is really, we are really not improving the biodiversity of the land. And it means that, and it's a decision that I've been questioned a lot by my family around. But the thing is that these systems, the monoculture systems, is what has put our farmers where they are today, right? The high cost of inputs, I think Shim was referring to earlier, that is what is keeping our farmers trapped. And unfortunately, a lot of our conversations today is really about that. How do we shift to that regenerative? I think there is already a huge movement that is shaping up all around this country, all around this region, that is not, that is focusing on organics. Unfortunately, it starts getting labeled as like organic. I mean, the whole Gawat Kalinga movement, right? And what we are trying to do here. But what I think, as you rightly pointed out, is that for us, as we were talking earlier, transitioning to a regenerative economy, to a regenerative agricultural system, I believe is the only way forward if we want to save our planet, because majority of the problems that we have in the world today can be tracked back to the extractive agricultural industry and the system that we have today. And so, Shim, what about to the second question on financial literacy? Because finance ultimately comes to all of it.
Yeah, I guess one of the major findings in a lot of studies that deals with the smallholder farmers is that financial literacy is an area where there is a huge gap. A lot of our farmers do not have a comprehensive appreciation. They have an understanding, but an appreciation in putting into practice is a different thing. But that can also be aligned to the quality of the government support in terms of education. How are we in terms of providing non-formal education to our farmers? Are we providing free education in terms of financial literacy? Looking at for example, in the Tech Talk Institutes, which they can access, there is no financial literacy course to be offered to our smallholder farmers. And for me, that's an area that I think the government could really work on. Not having a comprehensive understanding on financial literacy is affecting their capacity to access finances without appreciating that they need to separate the personal and the profit from that. It's really affecting them. They don't have properties that could serve as collaterals to whenever they apply for loans that can serve as collateral. And all of these, even the documents, the technical terms, are not well, and that's why they shy away from applying into that, and they are now dependent on the loan sharks that are giving them a lot of this problem. I think some area that the investors and the government could do is to for investors and the non-government organizations as well, to focus on that, build on the capacity. But the government can also support to balance the ROI as well as the impact to the community, is to have, for example, the policy on social procurement, that local governments and the government should prioritize procuring products that are being produced by the communities with less documents. That's empowering. That could really translate into more income to them and providing more opportunities for their children to go to a better quality educations and access health services, and all of these. That also includes empowering women, because you're now looking at how women should really be part of the discussion in all of these in the policy. And let us not forget about the indigenous people who are utilizing the land for so long but do not have titles. So we can adopt the user fact policy, which is an important thing. So yeah, we're talking about financial literacy, but it has a huge impact to the lives of our farmers. I hope that we responded to the question.
Maybe just to also add, right? I think Shim pointed out is, there is a mix. What happens is sometimes when you do give a loan to farmer, then they're mixing between the personal but we have to understand the roots of this, right? Why are they constantly in debt is because of the need for those loans for the high cost of inputs. And that it's a cycle that can't end, because at the end of the 6 months, again, you need it and again, you need it. And what happens at the end of the harvest, you're not earning enough to cover the costs, right? So there's a fundamental systemic issue there, which is continuously. So yes, we can teach the farmers how to kind of, separate your personal and like what you're putting into your agribusiness. But we have to also fix the root cause, because without that, we can keep, as we were saying, joking earlier, capacity building forever. But if we are not fixing this root cause, which is a systemic issue of agriculture, then we'll keep having the same problem. Not to take away from the fact that financial literacy is important. Yes, I think what Shim referred to earlier, like savings is important, right? All of this, where it is very much a subsistence living, but it is also a subsistence living because there is nothing left over from the earnings, right? So it's kind of, two sides of the same coin. I think like going back to your earlier question, like we are seeing really powerful movements, for example, in Bangsamoro, right? Like even businesses like Coffee for Peace and others who are working with indigenous farmers to actually retain the quality of their land, their soil, their water, but still create, quality produce of coffee and export quality. Majority of the coffee from there is exported. So all of that is there. And I just want to comment on the last thing that Shim said, which I think is so powerful, which is that, talking about sort of behaviors, but also eating local. I think that is one problem that we do have in this country. Like, we are primarily eating imported food. We are an agricultural country, and we are fairly obsessed with. I was so shocked, and I think when I came and then I found that there is no local milk. Right? I was like, okay, I was like, where could I find local milk? And in fact, the first in enterprises that I wanted to invest was in the milk entrepreneurs. And I found that there are no cows in the Philippines, which I found like shocking. I just couldn't accept it. It's such an important part of like an agricultural economy. And I was just shocked that all the milk is from Australia and New Zealand, and in cans and bottles, which was just like a shock to my system. That's why like I spent like 1 year like traveling around the country to just understand like what's happening. But eating local, the amazing produce that is coming from all around this country and our smallholder farmers, we have to help them make it more nutritious and tasty. But let's try to eat more local. That is a simple thing that each of us can do every single day without much effort.
Yeah, I hope. Oh, okay. We'll maybe entertain 2 more questions and then. Okay. Sir?
We're okay to answer.
Okay.
As I said, we're like taking
That's
up the
good.
space of the others as well, right? We'll make you.
Yeah, yes, please. And also the lady at the back afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. I'm Gary. I'm actually an investment banker, so I'm definitely one of the propagators of extractive agriculture.
Sorry, sir. We didn't mean to single you out.
No, but that's fine. That's fine. Actually, I work with large agro-industrial companies, so I know how they're funded, and it's actually very easy. I mean, risk return. Debt equity, all kinds. We've done it, right? Okay. Now, my question is actually for smallholder farmers. And I think many of you are trying to do funding. So my question is actually very pointed. Who are the funders for smallholder farmers? Who funds them? I hear that the government probably, banks. Is it banks? Are they private investors? What do they look for? Given the risks that they face. It's very, very risky to fund very smallholder farmers, especially there's a lack of scale. There's climate issues, right? Okay. So sorry, it's quite, yeah. So that's the question actually. Who are the players? Who funds them?
Who's funding them? Let's be more positive in our response. The government has programs. It has mechanisms to support smallholder farmers. They have that already in the laws, in the policies. But is the funding enough for them to transform the lives of our farmers? That's a question which we've been trying to ask also, and which is not. And that is why a lot of our smallholder farmers would rather go to loan sharks, because that's an easy money for them to access finances. No documents at all, just mere talking, and they can keep on, asking for more loans from that. Most of the time, smallholder farmers are dependent on their families. And this is why some of them would rather push their children to go abroad to become domestic helpers just to have some capitals on the businesses that they want or to pursue with it. It's a very sad situations that we're facing in. But this is not also true to a lot. There are also farmers that are doing their best to access finances into formal institutions. So they need to be capacitated. They seek the support of non-government organizations. There are grants being provided by the official development assistance. That's a source also. But we have a large number of farmers. The entire country is basically an agricultural industry, and we're not really half in terms of responding to the needs of our farmers. Because if we are, then we're not importing a lot of these agri products, but we're actually supporting the products that we have.
Yeah. So I think I'll answer the second part because I think Shim very well explained like who is really funding today. I think there's definitely a gap, right? And which is being filled by as much as possible by microfinance institutions, which could be predatory, which could be okay. I think there's a mix like anywhere else. And then, of course, the informal lending. But I think as an investor myself, I think the way that we are, was there? It's like, okay, was there a tremor? Maybe we spoke too much about this, Shim. That's what happened. But we're really looking to do this through backing entrepreneurs who are working with smallholder farmers. But even there, we're seeing a gap where the investment is really going a bit higher up in the value chain. Nobody wants to be actually investing in even enterprise models that is kind of dealing at the riskier stage, which is at the inputs and the production, right? Most of the investment is going on the value added side, the market side. And even that is fairly new. So I think when it comes to sort of investing in sort of business models, I think that's where we are seeing more of the investment. I think the pandemic definitely increased a lot of interest in the farm to market models, and those are the entrepreneurs who are raising far more capital. But we actually need more investment at the earlier stages in that value chain, which is, as you said, like too risky. So I believe the way really forward is through blended mechanisms where you do sort of mix philanthropic risk appetite capital with risk, a capital that has like much lower threshold for risk. And then, using that sort of as a blended format can mitigate some of these gaps that are there. And those are some of the types of instruments we are really trying. For example, the entrepreneur who is here, Nelbin, we've actually provided sort of very, very flexible loan, right, with the moratorium on interest in the first year so she can experiment, and then a repayment structure that is based on revenue. So if this quarter she's earning more, then she can repay more. If next quarter she's earning less, then she can repay less. So I think there is a very new field of the blended financing instruments that are being tried. It's nowhere at the scale to address the gaps. But I would say if, as an investor, allowing sort of finding mechanisms where that risk can be mitigated and sort of join co-investing and using some of the blended financing mechanisms, I think is one way to kind of manage the risk return sort of horizon.
Probably one example of an area where we could see is to take advantage of the Islamic financing. This is not just for Muslims, it's universal. Even the UK is actually studying it. There's a concept that they call the murabbaha. The murabbaha's mechanism is that, for example, you're a farmer, but you need some equipments and facilities for you to scale up the operations. What the bank will do is to purchase all of those equipments. So it will purchase the equipments and then put some premium, which is very clear. It discusses to the farmer and then give it to the farmer. So it's a profit sharing and a profit losing also mechanisms. And it allows the farmer to utilize the facilities or the equipment in real time. So that's actually empowering also.
I think there's a comment. Someone would like to comment on the discussion.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted. I'm Joe. I'm also from the bank, but I just wanted to share something. I think there's also a gap between the farmers, Department of Agriculture, and Bangko Sentral. No negative on that one, but it's more of there is a mandate of Bangko Sentral to be asking all local banks to come up with a certain percentage of their loan portfolio strictly for agri-loan. The problem there is sometimes there is that budget, but they don't know where to go and what to do. So there is the gap. There's the gap. But I think if you ask me about the cows, there are a lot in Mindanao. In fact, they're trying their best to come up with their own. There's also Department of Agriculture also made like it's a high crossbreed between the local carabaos and the cows. They started it in Davao and they're spreading it, but it's still not enough. And the others are coming in from the North Luzon and the South Luzon side on their own private arrangement. But I think the agri-loan is something that the local banks wanted to do, except I think they need to have more structures on commitment, right? Because as you said, you cannot just go to a small farmer, but you want to help them, but how can you do it, right? So there's that gap. In fact, there was one time in my other hat as a Rotarian, I brought actually the DA to Gensan to discuss and be one, because I attended a function wherein they organized and honored the top, valedictorians in Metro Manila of the school. And the speaker was a Department of Agriculture secretary. He was telling everybody that he's willing to give scholarship to them, whoever wanted. And the answer there is none, because you're talking in Metro Manila. So I encourage them to go to the right areas, right? So I encourage them to go to, that time I had connections there to Gensan. And the Gensan, what do you have? So when you define agriculture, it's not only the land farming, it's also fishing, right? So they have to understand. And in fact, there's the gap. They were focusing on asparagus in Gensan and forgot all about the fishing. So I brought them to what's the university? I forgot. So Mindanao State U, diba? Mindanao State U. So he was surprised and he was very happy to do it. But I don't know what happened. I made them. They should be the one to follow up, because I gave them the connection, but they should follow up, right? So, and the other one is the definition of sustainable finance. Right now, from the bank that I am right now, the definition of a framework, in Banco Central, they just issued, I think 2021, they issued a sustainability network, right? And then framework. And then this 2022, they issued a new circular saying the sustainability finance roadmap. But still, they know they are not yet there. That's why they invited us to talk about impact investing. So it's totally different. Sustainable finance, impact investing, philanthropy, they're totally different. When I'll just share a very quick one so that you'll understand also. When you put money in the bank, you ask for an interest, right? So as a depositor, you ask for an interest. That's the traditional one. For philanthropy, that's the extreme one. It's like saying, I wanted to donate, I wanted to support this group without even thinking about anything. But the problem with philanthropy sometimes, it's not also on the impact. It's what they wanted to do. But the sustainable finance, that's where you're saying that there should be like, how do you call it? How many the profit per year and everything. That's to make it sustainable. But the impact is where you pull funds specifically focusing on a certain let's say, you say you wanted to give financial literacy to the farmers, example, if that is your project, or you wanted to give certain, how do you call it? You're saying regenerative agriculture. So if you want to focus on that one has nothing right now. There's no, how do you call it? Interest over time. There's no research on that one yet in terms of finance, but to put it into a fund exclusively to focus on that. And I am an investor. I'll bring my money in. I bring it in not because I want to earn, not because I want to be philanthropic, but because I want to create an impact. So that's impact investing. That's totally different. So just sharing with you the terminologies, and maybe we can exchange numbers and see how we can help each other. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful comment. I think you could also take seat here as one of the. No, I'm just kidding. So there's a last question. Okay, we'll get a few more questions here, but let's go first with the Carolyn White and Green.
Wait.
Sorry, I can be quick. I have just one reflection and a question. I'm happy that you also touched upon like working with young people in agriculture. I used to work in a banking sector that provide a fund to agriculture as well, but now I moved to research organization. So our job to provide like the rural area and agriculture more attractive. But I think at the end of the day, it also their choice. They can be farmers or social entrepreneurs. I would be okay as well, you know, if they get out of the city to pursue their dream and perhaps one day come back to the rural city and join their family farming. And it linked to my question, which we didn't really cover in the discussion. Do you think also the remittances could be a powerful tool for the financing in agriculture? Because for example, in Nepal, they are also one of the highest remittance income that they also have like funding facility to channel this finance to agriculture and, you know, to improve also the livelihood of farmers. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I think that's a great question. I think for us as a group, right? Because if you look at where remittances, this is very much a remittance economy, and you know I can draw parallels to the part of India where I come from, which is Kerala, which is, you know, a compatriot of all Filipinos, because all people from Kerala have a Filipino best friend because they all met in the Middle East. But yes, I think that's definitely an avenue. So, so we also run a angel impact investment platform where we're trying to bring together co-investors to really kind of address a lot of this. And one of the things that we've actually been looking at is that how do we really tap the diaspora who are sending money back and maybe now, you know, really just putting into sort of traditional real estate, but they actually want to do good as well, right, with their money. So I think there is an opportunity. It has really not been tapped. Because most of the remittances actually go in sustenance of like the families and, you know, what needs to be spent there. Or if there is more, then it is invested primarily in real estate and those kind of areas, right? So can there a portion of that actually go towards impact? I think it is definitely the transition that we were talking about where local money and local wealth can do good. And I think this is untapped potential that, you know, we really haven't found a way. I've seen some examples in Pakistan, some in Nepal, and some where I'm from in Kerala as well, where a lot of it has gone towards development projects. So I think we have to create a trusting mechanism through which, because this is hard-earned money of somebody who's, you know, gone abroad to earn for their family. And there are one or two organizations locally that are already starting to try this. So I think it's starting, but very, very early days. But I think the potential is definitely there to do that. And to your earlier point on really encouraging young people, and I think ma'am here also was talking about it, right? I think, and I'm sure Shim can add to this. See, the average age of the Filipino farmer was 56 of years ago, but I'm sure if we check now, that's going to be 60. But the reason is like, why would a farmer encourage their next generation to be a farmer? Because they are stuck in poverty traps. So I think it's unrealistic for us to say, let us just encourage farmers to, you know, make their next generation stay in agriculture. Would you do that to your child if you knew that it was going to be a life of poverty? I would say like all of us are trying to do the reverse, right? We are trying to make sure that the next generation is living better. That's exactly what farmers are doing as well. So unless, going back to the theme of this discussion today, unless we transition out of this extractive agricultural system, the reality is that the next generation will not stay in agriculture. And all we're going to have are the industrial farms. And then we eat all of those things that is going to give us the diseases and then spend more money on trying to treat those diseases, right? So we're stuck in this thing. I think what the pandemic has shown is that there is an urgency from young people to save this planet. Because it's the only home that we'll have. We can spend as much money on going to Mars or wherever, but this is the home that at least the next few generations will know. And so we have to save that. But until we transition away from this extractive mindset, I think it's, you know, the opportunity for young people to stay in agriculture. I think there is not enough incentive today. the way that economy is. So all of us have to work towards, I think, that transition. Like, we cannot go to Bangsamoro and say like, oh, how do we like just get the young people to stay in agriculture? Why should they stay in agriculture? So we have to change that. We have to make being a farmer, which a lot of young people today are doing, right? We saw like a big shift. It's starting, but fundamentally we have to overhaul the system. And that is what, we have to put our collective efforts today.
And why would the young people go into difficult farming when they can actually amass millions doing blogging nowadays? So, well, how can we attract the young ones when there are alternatives? But that's a problem that we're facing.
Thank you. I hope that answered your question. To the
One
lady
question
at
and
the
one
back.
insight here, but really quick because we're a bit late.
Okay.
No, that wasn't you.
Yeah. No, can we go to the lady first? Yeah. The back. Yeah, we'll be brief.
Yes, good morning. My question is for Sir Salahuddin from BARM. Yes, as you mentioned before about Islamic finance, sir. So my question is, we as a farmers cooperative, are we able to avail this finance, and how?
Okay. Well, currently, the Bangsamoro government is formulating its policy towards the Islamic finance. And they are still in the process of really understanding it and applying it to our context. So to answer that, if you're going to ask me if the Bangsamoro government right now, purely Islamic microfinance is not yet ready, but in time it will come. But there are institutions like, I think ASA Philippines is actually providing Islamic microfinance. So they're providing loans without interest, and there's just some, so you can access that. So there are institutions. Our organizations also, the Moropreneur Incorporated is also doing that. So, yep.
And the last question, please.
Hi. Hello, my name is Tonio. I'm a farmer and I'm so resonating with
Young farmer.
the discussions earlier. I'd like to ask about the discussion earlier was rooted in just transitions from extractive agriculture to more regenerative practices. And we understand that monocultures are founded on the fact that it's more predictable, it's easier to scale. That's why it's attracting more investment. I'm curious if there are like the exact mechanisms to fund more regenerative practices, since I know from experience that it can get unpredictable, and especially for farmers who have been practicing monocultures with the soil that's barren and damaged, ecosystems are damaged, that there's higher risk for pest and disease issues. There's higher risk for crop failure. So maybe I know that regenerative financing is becoming a thing now, but I'm curious about the processes for smallholder farmers to link up with these financing instruments, and what kind of journeying with them happens. Because I understand it takes a while for land to be regenerated. Yeah, thank you.
I think that's a powerful question, and your comment on the farmers know, right, that the land and the environment is going towards being almost barren, right? I think that's so powerful, and thank you for sharing that, because that is the truth of the agricultural system. So I think, yes, I think you're rightly so to say that it's fairly new, but what we are seeing is that more and more funds in Southeast Asia are coming up focused on land-based sort of investments and wanting to support regenerative agriculture. It's a very small group right now, but I think we've seen, for example, in India, huge movements. And I think one of the thing is really about organizing, right? A community being organized around sort of regenerative agriculture. Now, what we need to find is funding. So when the transition happens, there will be a period maybe where you will experience lower yields. You can't meet the quantity, right? That is being asked for. And so that is, I think, like one part of risk financing that really needs to happen when that transition is taking. There are a few projects that I have seen around in the Philippines that are doing that, but I think we need that to be far more institutional, but that requires like an institutional mindset. But there are small funders and foundations that are starting to do that, because this is the pathway, right? If we want to survive as a species. So I think, so it's happening, but in smaller pockets. So I think one is that to, if possible, to get that sort of a bit more of a collective movement, which means that maybe you will be the first person trying it out, right? And so because you maybe are have a bit more agency to be able to understand this. So that's what we've seen, for example, smaller groups really starting this transition. If you look up the work of Vandana Shiva and others who are really, at the forefront of really these transitions, there's a lot of data to say that this whole myth around high yield, not possible if you actually farm, sustainably and organically, that is not true. When you actually give back, when you give back to the soil, when you maintain the soil, when you improve water tables, actually plants grow in abundance. That is the nature. But there is a challenge around seeds, because that is a whole other systemic issue. And so the kind of seeds that you're using may also be something that you have to think about, because if we continue to use, I don't want to call out specific names because someone might show up at my house, but those type of seeds that then all you're moving is to like drought resistant, climate resistant, without actually fundamentally being able to transition to regeneration. So I think for you as a journey, I think you have to look at like the inputs, you have to look at who can kind of help finance when you're making that transition, but maybe even becoming that model sort of farm and then building sort of the collective. That is typically the transitions that we've seen. But all of the data shows that all of these things that, we have been sold that like it is impossible to produce in quantity and at scale, that is not true. Regenerative agriculture, when you give back to the land, when you respect the traditions, when we actually improve the water table, there is no way. And we use the seeds that are not actually, harming the soil. Actually, you can meet the quantities and you can produce at scale.
Hello. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony from First Services, an advocacy-driven training company. I've been into training and advocacy for 25 years. And one thing that I observed is, just like what's being mentioned earlier, there is a disconnect now from the policy of the government, from the services, even from the wonderful initiatives of the entrepreneurs to the people in the grassroots. Another thing is what Sir had mentioned specifically, the access. Now, allow me to share a quick insight, which I believe could help all of us. So basically, all kinds of advocacy, especially environmental, it's always a matter of mindset, which have been mentioned also by our panelists. Another thing, it's also a matter of culture. And lastly, it's a matter of structural or policy making. Now, regarding the the three concerns, my discovery and suggestion would be, for the mindsetting, it's important that we have grassroots mentoring and grassroots consultation, mentoring, and dissemination of information. All of us here were very much privileged to have this opportunity, but let us face the reality. The farmers out there are the ones who need this kind of ideas. But how do we bring this to the people in the grassroots? So I think that's the first one. If we would like to really educate them, the people who are educated and have the resources should extend to the people out of their comfort zone and extend them. Likewise, when I mentioned mindsetting, it's also on the part of the people who are blessed enough. I really appreciate the panelists and the people who ask questions. It was mentioned that basically people who help, whether individual or rich, regardless of social status, they just help based on their idea and preference, which is a very difficult thing to rely on. Why? Because my preference and my intention would not match, most likely it doesn't match the needs of the people who are we really trying to help. This is not a matter of intention. This is a matter of studying the situation and the people for us to be effective and to truly sustain our efforts. So yun po yung una kong regarding the mind setting. The next thing about cultural, we have mentioned lots of technical things, policy, and these are all good. But one thing that we have to also incorporate is the socio-cultural analysis. You mentioned about why are people not motivated into farming? We have ideas, yes, but how do we validate that? And how do we really become more effective? Of course, when we contextualize. But how can you contextualize if you don't have a thorough study or a research regarding the people that we want to serve, right? Maybe this is how we know them, but is that really they are? Parang ganun, di ba? Yung gano. And then lastly, in terms of the policy or structure, siyempre, reality check, most of the academic discussions and forums, usually, we have lots of wonderful ideas. What's missing is the key people in charge of the policy making are not always present. So maybe in future activities like this, and even after this, we could have dialogues, no, with the key people in the government. We mentioned about Bangko Sentral, but how it's just about us. Nobody from Bangko Sentral is here, right? Look at the idea. So it's better that we have we invite key peoples whenever we have wonderful endeavors like this one, so that they will also hear ang gaganda ng idea eh. Tama po, ang gaganda ng solution. Every time I attend, it's always a wonderful idea. But the people who has the authority, siguro in simple term, who has the power to make it happen, they're not here. Yun lang naman po yung suggestion ko. So thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you, Anthony, for summarizing what we've been talking for the past 2 hours here. And definitely, we just wanted to highlight that it's good that you've highlighted the need for everything to be cascaded at the ground. I just wanted to commend Fabian and his team in Active and Convergence, because they've also brought here farmers from the Maguindanao areas, and some farmers here who could really get direct knowledge and information to the discussions on that.
Okay, so I guess that's it. Thanks everyone for attending, and especially for the people online as well. I hope everybody got the reflection or an insight, a thing or two from the discussions. And yeah, maybe we have some last words.
Call to action. Shiv.
Call to action.
Call to actions to the government. We need to be more data-driven in terms of our policy. We have to, just what Anthony has been telling and everything we said here, we have to base it from the empathy journey, from the real situations, and then make sure that policies can be implemented by having a dialogue to the people, making sure that they understood it very well. Mechanisms, facilities, infras are all complete. It has to be an enabling environment for people to subscribe to that and follow the policies. I think that's one major thing. And let's not lose our being human. We are all human. The humanity race, investors, businesses, people want, let's all think about surviving the 100 years for this earth. We need to work together, collaborate, so that we can still live it with each other.
That's a absolutely, just to resonate with what Shim said last. Today, we are at war with our earth. We are at war with farmers. We are at war with our health. And it is, we have to go back to the true meaning of agriculture, right? Caring for the earth. And that is the only path forward for us to survive, on this planet and to retain our home. But if we were to walk away from here to say, what do we really need to do? We need to eat local. Right? We need to eat seasonal. We don't need to eat a mango in December, right? It's really okay to wait for the summer to eat the indigenous, the indigenous fruits when it is supposed to be, flowering. So those are simple things that we can do. We need to continue to support local organization and indigenous groups, and we need to respect that they actually have the knowledge, right, of how to make sure that the soil remains fertile, how to improve the water table, how to actually grow at scale. This knowledge exists. We need to respect that. And we need to, as much as possible, all of us are players in this extractive system that, we have arrived at. And for us to transition away, as the gentleman at the back was saying, if we need more farmers producing food, it's really not about building, monoculture farms with just producing at scale. It's about transitioning our system to something that is inclusive, and that is respectful of our cultures and our indigenous way of doing things. So I hope if, everything that we spoke about the 2 hours, these are specific actions that you can take, support smallholder farmers. Let's eat local. And even since this is a financing session, there is a movement around sustainable finance, around impact investing. And, there are a few of us who are starting to do this, but there is. So let's try and find each other. I think you are asking, like, how do we take this back? I think these forums are great to get connected. Now that we are connected, let's find ways to continue to work together, because only radical collaboration is going to help us make that transition. Thanks so much for listening to us for
Thank
the
you
last 2
guys.
hours.